Well, thank you so much, Mr. Malema, for your speech. I'm going to start with just a couple of questions before I throw it open to the audience. And I'd like to start by picking up on the end of your speech, when you mentioned your schedule of what you plan to do here in the UK. You spoke earlier today in Cambridge, you're speaking in Oxford now. Tomorrow you're speaking, I believe, at Chatham House. On Saturday you're speaking at the African Enterprise Awards at the London Capital Club. And these institutions are considered to be at the heart of the English establishment. You'll be addressing audiences very different to those you normally address in South Africa. What would you say is the purpose of your visit to the UK?
Well, the message remains the same, because we shouldn't be tempted to change a message when we speak to different constituencies, because we'll be misleading. The message is economic freedom in our lifetime, in South Africa and the African continent. And that message has been shared yesterday with Africa investors, serious captains of the industry. And one of them was saying to me that the demand to educate everybody will create an environment where everybody is educated and there is no one to provide cheap labor, and as a result the economy will not survive, because it's the same problem you are confronted with here at UK. And I asked him to not generalize. We need to narrow that point down to our personal experiences. And I said to the chap, one of the captains of the industry, can we agree that we need to provide cheap labor, and you volunteer your child to be one of those people who's not going to go to school and provide that cheap labor? The guy refused immediately. And I said, if your child can't do it, then no child must be allowed a situation where you are denied access to school because you must be one of those who are reserved to provide cheap labor. So we are in a struggle to educate the most exploitative captains of the industry to rethink their attitude and to begin to work with Africans to make the economy of Africa to work for African people.
You spoke about the fact that your message needs to stay the same wherever it is you're speaking, but you also spoke in your speech about the perception of your message. The word radical is used to describe the EFF. And in 2014, you received around 6% of the vote in South Africa. Do you think that's down to the perception of the EFF as radical? And would you do anything to try and change that perception, to try and gain a majority government?
We don't have to change a perception, because the distortion of who we are is done by white-owned liberal media, which seeks to distort us and project us as if we are warlords. Yet we are a legally registered political formation that complies with every piece of legislation in the country. We do everything we're required to do. We carry no weapons. We just articulate our perspective unashamedly. We are not ashamed to associate with the less paid workers. We are not ashamed to represent the rural African women who are denied to own the land, not only by white capitalism, but by black so-called traditional leaders. Now, because we do that, we become the enemy of a dominant elite group in South Africa and in the entire world, because these people are somehow connected. Our attitude is actually attracting more votes to us. You shouldn't just mention 6%. You must mention that you got 6% in less than a year. So that we know what we're dealing with here. In less than a year, without any financial support from established companies. We are the only party in South Africa which led a march of more than 50,000 people on a Tuesday during working hours. When people are supposed to be at work, we didn't close any shop. We didn't close any school. But we brought 50,000 people to come and march with us to demand economic freedom as evidence that a lot of our people are not working, they are idling at home. There are new predictions now, some done by the official opposition in parliament, that the support of the EFF has grown to 12%. It is going to be tested next year in the local government elections. Predictions that gives you a double support even outside the election period. Imagine if we're to enter the election period. So the EFF in South Africa is the only organization that is growing at an unexpected speed. And it is the only organization in the history of South Africa to be launched in less than a year, be represented in the National Assembly, be represented in the National Council of Provinces, be represented in all provincial parliaments, and be official opposition in 2 provinces. What helps the EFF and what makes the EFF the future is because majority of its youth, majority of its leadership rather, it's young people. So you are guaranteed the future there. Unlike old parties which are led by old men who wanted to create an impression that politics in Africa is an exclusive activity of old African males. We're doing away with that myth and reviving youth activism and destroying youth apathy in politics, because we need young people to take charge of their future now. If they don't take the future into their own hands now, then they must know they are plowing a seed of a disaster. Because the future is what you make of it now. And that's what we're doing in our country and in the entire African continent.
To pick up on that theme of the trajectory of the EFF, given the immense success, comparatively, given that it's only a year old, obviously if you were the majority party, you could take action, decisive action, to change the power structures you referenced before that distort the message of the EFF. As you continue and before you get to that majority stage of the party, what would you change, if anything, about the EFF and its message until such time as you do have a majority government?
Why change a brand which is working? Why change a brand which is working? This is working for us. Why fix it when it's not broken? The EFF is a brand, well established and marketed, not only in the country, but internationally. The message of the EFF is well received. You must go and Google an interview of the former president of South Africa, Malema, who said 2-3 weeks ago, the growth of the EFF is informed by the fact that their message resonates with young people who constitute the future of South Africa. We are doing very well. We know our constituents. We are not all over. We know what we represent. Those are the people we seek to win over. We want to represent them, and we think we are representing them very well in every sphere where we are deployed as the political party.
The final question from me before we open to the floor. Would you ever, after all this time, agree to govern with Jacob Zuma and the ANC as part of a coalition?
Well, we'll never do that. I think we want to destroy the ANC arrogance. We want to destroy the disrespect of the ANC towards our people. The ANC thinks that it is South Africa and not the other way around. They think that what happens in South Africa must happen through them, otherwise nothing will happen. Now, we have made a commitment to prove to the ANC that you are nothing else but a political party. You are not Alpha and Omega. Like South Africa begins and ends with the ANC. That arrogance leads to a point where Jacob Zuma says he loves the ANC more than the country. That the ANC comes first, then South Africa later. And when asked, what do you mean by that? Because he's intellectually challenged, he then says, no, I mean ANC brought democratic South Africa. There is no ANC that brought democratic South Africa. It is the people of South Africa who brought a democratic South Africa. Not ANC. In 1994, ANC had less than 500,000 members. Yet the people who voted for the ANC were more than 5 million. So how do you say 500,000 people brought about a democratic South Africa and forget the whole entire millions who brought a democratic South Africa? The ANC was formed in 1912. South Africa existed way before 1912. South Africa existed even before the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck in 1652. So you're telling me about a baby of 1912, that is what made South Africa to be what it is? Not even Jan van Riebeeck can tell me that the arrival of settlers made South Africa to be what it is. They found it there with its beautiful oceans, mountains, and weather. Unlike the weather of UK.
Yeah, exactly. Are there any questions for Mr. Malema from the floor? The gentleman about 3 rows back on the left-hand side.
Around this time 20 years ago, I had the pleasure of listening to an articulate man speak in exactly the very same words. It's absolutely striking. His name is Robert Mugabe. And I'll be very honest with you. I totally agree with most of the things that you have mentioned, and I've seen this. And as you mentioned in your speech, you said you would like to take some lessons from what the mistakes other African countries made. Now, history has always repeated itself. For a revolutionary like you, if you get into power, somehow, some way, South African diamonds are going to become blood diamonds. The markets are going to be closed to South Africa. The state apparatus, so your media and so on, are going to be financed by the very same institutions that are alienated by the message that you are speaking. So I would like to know how you expect to move on from where you are now in such a way that you do not end up creating the very same African story like the one that we are seeing in Zimbabwe, like the one that we have seen in Malawi, in Zambia, like the one that we have seen, indeed, in almost every other part of Africa.
Well, we are not going to do what the Zimbabweans have done, of dropping blood of innocent people. There is nothing wrong with Robert Mugabe's policy of land. There's everything wrong with the method used to attain the land. We cannot have people killed. We cannot have people injured. because you want your land back. President Mugabe had more than 25 years to pass legislation through democratic means that will systematically take the land back into the rightful owners. He didn't do anything about it. He only introduced that policy at a time when he was losing power. It was opportunistic. It was not a real program that he believed in. Now, you ought to pass legislation through democratic means, parliament, in line with your constitution, which will take land back into the hands of the people. Already in South Africa, there are top judges who are saying, but what Malema says is already there. It is not put into test. Some are arguing that our legislature allows expropriation of land for as long as it is in the public interest and public purpose. But you've got a cowardice government which is not ready to expropriate land. Actually, some of the municipalities do expropriate land if they've got a clear program of using that land to benefit the public. Now, the market will not turn against people who want to own their land. If there are such markets, then there are undemocratic markets. We have to go and look for democratic markets which will appreciate rightful people owning their land. And the interesting thing with the world balance of forces is that there is now an indication of emerging progressive markets in the world. We now have the establishment of BRICS, of developing countries coming together to share a perspective. And we have a lot of markets today who are more than ready to come in if anyone threatens withdrawal. Now let's talk the Zimbabwean situation. After imposing of sanctions in Zimbabwe, and the people of Zimbabwe remaining firm and not wanting to move on the land question, we have seen a situation now where people from the same countries that have said they're imposing sanctions on Zimbabwe, going to Zimbabwe underground to go and look for those resources. We command ourselves and Zimbabwe 80% of the world platinum. If they withdraw in Zimbabwe and they withdraw in South Africa, where else will they get platinum? The 20% remaining platinum is scattered all over. Don't think you're going to find 20% of it in one country. It's all over. We've got many resources in Africa. That's why I speak of African unity, where African countries must come together and say, if they withdraw because they do not want to trade with us on the basis of the policies we have put in place which stand to benefit African people, let us all hold our resources. Let it be done in a peaceful way. Change is painful. We're prepared to go through that pain so that we can give birth to a beautiful thing called sharing of Africa's wealth by African people. So we don't talk war. We don't talk blood diamond. We are going to institutions like this one. We are meeting captains of the industry to persuade them. As it were in South Africa, we are accused now that we are dining with imperialists. It's okay. We are persuading them that let the resources of Africa be shared with the people of Africa. I went to a rally of ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, and I stood up to address them that there is no room for violence in the whole world today. and using violence to resolve political question is unacceptable. The whole rally was shocked because I subscribe to radical politics but not violence. I believe that through persuasion and exchanging of ideas and exposing the weaknesses of capitalist system in Africa, we will win what we're fighting for. If capitalism has worked here in the UK, let me tell you it has not worked in Africa. The system of capitalism is the one that produced poverty and unemployment in South Africa and the whole of Africa. There's never been any other system. Don't say socialism has failed in South Africa. It was never there. It has never been there. It has never been applied anywhere. If it failed in Soviet Union, not in Africa. Don't confuse Soviet Union with Africa. So it must be, the whole blame must be put on the door of capitalism. The diseases you see, underdevelopment you see, the unemployment, the inequalities, joblessness is as a result of a capitalist system in Africa. It didn't work for us. It worked for you. You are very fortunate. We have been the unfortunate people who have been a subject of exploitation by a capitalist system. So, throughout, we are persuading people through dialogue and robust engagement and open and honest engagement. But dropping of blood is not what is on our table. At least for now. I don't know what will happen in future. But at least for now, there is no discussion about armed struggle. There is no discussion about killing anyone for the resources of Africa. We believe we can win them over through the power of persuasion.
The gentleman who thought he was going to get the question given to him on the aisle about 3 rows from the front. Yes, you, sir.
Thank you very much. You mentioned briefly in your speech that you don't want China to recolonize Africa. And I'm wondering how you foresee China-South Africa relations if the EFF comes to power, and also how you foresee China-Africa relations in the future in general.
Our attitude is that China must invest in Africa and South Africa in particular through our own terms. We don't want the situation where the Chinese are going to own all strategic sectors of the economy and the means of production. We don't want Chinese to replace Europeans. That's not what we struggled for. We struggled for Africans to take rightful place in their politics and in their economy. So China, Europe, America, it doesn't matter. You're coming to invest in a South Africa ruled by EFF through the terms and conditions of the South African government. Look at what America did to China 2 weeks ago. They said to South Africa, if you don't allow us to come and dump our chicken and beef and pork in our country, we are going to terminate trade relations if you don't respond to this letter in 60 days. Zuma got so shocked and scared and responded in 10 days and was given 60 days. And they signed that you can come and dump everything here, it's fine. You know what it means for South Africa? It means the chicken industry is gone. It means the pork industry is gone. Because the chicken that get to be dumped, it's a chicken of a 3rd grade which is not needed there. If that chicken has got some black spots or is not good looking, Africa. Then it get a chicken in South Africa which you can buy, a chicken produced in South Africa which it sells for 12 rand, and a chicken that comes from America that sells for 5 rand. Obvious people are going to prefer the 5 rand chicken, and then it destroys the chicken industry in South Africa And when you destroy the chicken industry in South Africa, you then destroy jobs in that industry. So, if the EFF becomes government in South Africa, we are going to protect our borders and the trade, in particular, the South African industry. So that whatever gets to be dumped, particularly by China, doesn't undermine the South African industry. As we speak today,